to dead and roasted. What can I get you?
I think someone might have seen me out in the woods recently. I heard a story of a camp counselor at a nature reserve who saw an emaciated skeletal creature. Good lord, can a guy not get his 4 hours of moonlight? Anyway, welcome back, my friends. I'm just about to head on to my break, and I've got some scary work stories in store for you about haunted strangers, terrifying forest frights, and more. These are tales from the break room. I work in a haunted press office. From Anonymous. I've been experiencing some creepy things at my workplace, a well-known press office in Brazil. These incidents have left me and my colleagues both fascinated and creeped out. But it's also become a routine part of our work life, creating a strange mix of feelings that range from unease to a sense of normalcy. In our newsroom, there is a break room with a peculiar feature, a lead-sealed metal door. This door isolates a room filled with electrical wires and equipment, and is meant to be kept closed 24 hours a day, only opening for maintenance to prevent fire or explosion hazards. One day while I was having lunch with colleagues, we all noticed the door handle shaking vigorously. It was like someone was trying to open it from the inside. This was followed by 3 distinct knocks on the door. One of my colleagues, almost nonchalantly, walked over and knocked back, explaining that this ghost was a familiar presence in the office. The incident sparked a flurry of supernatural stories among my colleagues, as we shared our own bizarre experiences and tales. Besides the frequent disturbances with the break room door, which seem to have become quite commonplace, other unsettling events have occurred. Several colleagues have reported hearing the sound of chairs being dragged across the floor, and disembodied voices moaning from empty rooms. These voices were not mere whispers either. They carried an eerie, almost sorrowful tone that echoed through the empty hallways, sending chills down the spine of anyone who heard them. One of the most chilling encounters involved a colleague who came face to face with the ghost of our newspaper's founder. He was walking down a long, dark corridor at night when he saw a man approaching. As the figure of this man got closer, it greeted him with a cordial "good evening" and a nod. It wasn't until later that my colleague saw a photo of the founder, realizing it was the same person who had greeted him. He was so unnerved by the encounter, he refused to take night shifts afterward, shaken by the cold, intense gaze of the figure, which seemed so real and alive. Another colleague has reported hearing noises, voices, seeing movements coming from inside the building's elevator, even when he was the only person in the building. One particularly unsettling night, he heard the elevator doors open and close repeatedly, followed by the sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. These occurrences have become so frequent that they barely raise an eyebrow anymore. Yet, the sense of unease lingers. The janitors who work in our building have their own tales of supernatural occurrences too. They often see the figure of a woman in the printing machinery room, even though no one is supposed to be there. They describe it as a pale figure with long flowing hair. She appears out of the corners of their eyes, only to vanish when they turn to look at her directly. These sightings are so common that they've become part of a daily routine, and yet they never fail to unsettle those who encounter her. Over the years following these initial encounters, I've witnessed other supernatural phenomena in the office. Once I was the first to arrive at the newsroom in the early morning. It was 6 a.m., and as I went to the break room to fill my water jug, I distinctly heard chairs moving and muffled moans coming from the editor-in-chief's office. The office was locked, and no one else was in the building. On another occasion, I saw my cup being slowly dragged across the break room table, as if some unseen hand had grabbed it and was painstakingly pulling it across the surface. The cup moved steadily, and deliberately, defying any logical explanation. I watched, frozen in place, as it eventually came to rest at the edge of the table. I must clarify that I don't believe in ghosts. I hold the view that these occurrences are the work of demons masquerading as spirits to deceive people into believing there are other destinations besides heaven and hell. These experiences, while fascinating, serve as a reminder of the spiritual battles that might be happening around us, even when we cannot see them. Horror on the Preserve. From Theo. I'm a 19-year-old male who needed a summer job between my freshman and sophomore year of college. I'm majoring in environmental science, so when I got an opportunity to be a camp counselor teaching environmental education, I took it without hesitation. Now I work on a nature preserve in West Virginia. Some important things to preface are that this preserve is spread out over 163 acres of protected land and trails, and it has a small creek that runs through it. It also has a pretty extensive marsh that covers around a third of the preserve. In this particular week, I was tasked with leading a nocturnal animals camp. I was in charge of about 10 campers between the ages of 8 and 11. Since the camp theme was nocturnal animals, the camp took place between the hours of 6 o'clock to 10:30. My two fellow counselors and I, who each also have about 10 campers in their groups, had a litany of activities and games to do, all surrounding different animals you find at night. I'll call my other two counselors Wes and Gabe. Wes was an all-around outdoorsman, and Gabe had been a counselor here for a couple of years now. They were both very familiar with working with kids and traversing the preserve. I was the new counselor at camp, so sometimes they liked to mess with me and my group a little bit. Nothing major, though. It was a Thursday in the beginning of July. I had a pretty easy group. They listened really well, and none of them did any type of dangerous acts. So you could say we were having a great week. Near the end of the night, around 9:30 p.m., right as it was starting to get pitch black, Wes and I decided we really wanted to let the campers do a solo hike. A solo hike is when you have a counselor at the start and end of a trail, and you stagger the campers beginning the hike in intervals so they get to experience the outdoors by themselves, but still get a sense of security, knowing that there are people close by. Gabe decided to do another activity with his campers in the pavilion, so he wasn't going to join Wes and me on the solo hike. Wes really wanted to do the marsh loop, which just so happens to be the longest and most isolated hike on the preserve. When Wes suggested this, I saw a murk come across Gabe's face, so I figured they were trying to mess with me again. But I didn't really care, as the marsh loop was one of my favorites. When Wes and I brought our groups to the trailhead at the edge of the marsh, Wes offered to go to the end of the hike to get the campers when they finished. I was fine with this, so Wes and I did one last count of the campers and made sure they all had their personal flashlights. I then started to let the campers go one at a time. Everything was going smoothly. One of my campers, I'll call him P, was really scared of the dark, so I let him walk with me once all the campers had begun. P and I started through the marsh, and our flashlights weren't really much help. They were quite dim, constantly flickering on and off. I got sick of messing with mine and told P to turn his off too. That way we could just let our eyes adjust to the darkness. As we were walking through the marsh, I began to hear a loud, slapping noise behind me. I stopped and turned. P grabbed my hand as we listened together. When we stopped walking, the loud slapping sounds also stopped. P was starting to hold tighter, and I could tell he was scared. "Don't worry, buddy, it's just beavers. We have a colony out here in the marsh," I whispered to him. Honestly, I thought it was just beavers, slapping their tails at night, as this was when they were most active. So P and I continued to walk. The slapping started up again, but this time it was coming from in front of us. P jumped and grabbed my leg. Now I knew what was going on. It was Gabe out in the marsh trying to freak me out. I got a little teed off because this was holding up my hike and scaring my little camper here. I yelled out, "Gabe, come on out. You're freaking out P." No response. I didn't even hear the bullfrogs anymore that were deafening just minutes ago. "Gabe, I'm serious. I'm not in the mood for this right now." Dead silence. I've spent enough time in the woods to know that no sounds at all is not a good sign. I grabbed P's hand, and I began to survey the marsh, trying to see if I could find anything out of place. At this point, my eyes had adjusted pretty well, but I still could not make out anything that could be causing these loud slaps. I decided it was time to finish this hike, as we still had about a mile to go. P and I picked up our pace, and the slaps were louder, now seemingly all around us. It didn't make sense. I couldn't see anything weird. I couldn't hear anything besides these bass-driven blows on the water. I was completely bewildered. As we continued, I looked behind us, and I saw some cattails being pushed to the side. P and I froze, watching these cattails being flung out of the mud. I snapped out of it and whipped out my flashlight. When it turned on, I was horrified. I saw two fluorescent red eyes 50 yards behind us in the cattails. As I turned the flashlight up, I saw a pair of blood-soaked antlers. It was like time stood still. I couldn't move. The slaps had stopped, and seemingly whatever creature I was looking at had frozen too. I stood like this for I don't know how long, until I felt a tug. It was P pulling my arm, crying, telling me to run. I didn't hesitate. I dropped my flashlight and picked up P as I started sprinting down the last leg of the trail. I heard the slapping start again, and I heard the most gut-wrenching roar behind me. As I ran out of the swamp and entered the small cedar forest, I glanced behind me, and I saw this thing rise up out of the mud on all fours. It looked dead, like every piece of flesh on it was rotting. Its face was all bone, and it had two huge fangs protruding from its mouth. P started to become hysterical, and I sprinted even faster, knowing that this thing was probably gaining on us. It was knocking over huge cedars as I traversed the path. Finally, I saw a fire, and a group of campers circled around it. I started to scream at them, "Run, run," as I approached, but they all looked at me blankly. I ran into the center of the circle and looked behind me, only to see nothing. No cedars falling behind me, no antlers, no sounds. I was completely out of breath by then, trying to comfort P when Wes approached me, asking what was wrong. He took me to the side, and I explained the whole thing. He didn't say anything to me at first. He instead turned to our campers and told them to extinguish the fire, that we were going to go back to the pavilion now. He whispered to me that I needed to collect myself so I didn't scare the campers, then I needed to get out of the forest as soon as possible. The second Wes and I got back to the pavilion, we called all the parents to come pick up their kids. Then we sat in silence. I tried to comfort P, but nothing helped, not until his mother arrived. After all the campers left, Wes came up to me and said very somberly, "I've seen it too, but you need to forget about it." Then he walked away. I stared, confused, out of the window, deciding right then and there I was never stepping foot on this preserve again. That would be my final day. No Normal Asylum. From Bad Badger. This is a bit of a long story, but I feel like the background and history of the place is important to understand just how terrifying this job truly was. There are a few different events that happened that scared me to my core, both natural and supernatural. Back in 2017, I was desperate for work. We had just bought a house, and having bounced from job to job previously, I was ready to find something stable, or at least something that paid well. Unfortunately, as time went on, the only thing available to me was a part-time job as a security officer at this old mental health hospital. As an added kick to the head, it really didn't pay all that well either. For the sake of privacy, I won't say the name or location, but do understand it is fairly notorious. Some of the patients there have been in the news for one reason or another. And the place is very old, with a pretty wild history going back to the 1800s. More importantly, it's still open, helping people across the state. No reason to give it a bad rap. On my first day, I met with my supervisor. We'll call him Matt. I got outfitted for what I would need. I was surprised to learn that I would be wearing a vest. Not Kevlar, but heavy enough to withstand a knife. Despite this, I was only given a flashlight and a radio. As far as other gear goes, this would not be the last of my surprises. Once I was dressed and set, I was off to tour the grounds. I was shocked that the facility was so huge, and thinking about it now, calling it a facility sounds wrong. It was more like touring a small village. There were 3 main buildings that held patients: an old schoolhouse, the old doctor's house, several bunkhouses, a separate building for the cafeteria, a gym, a maintenance bay, a cemetery, and several old buildings that at the time looked condemned. Seated almost directly behind our grounds was the prison for criminally insane as well. Connecting all those buildings, including the prison, were a series of intricate tunnels. The entire tunnel network tracked close to 5 miles doing a loop through the grounds, as well as webbing to the other buildings within that circle. Matt described it as kind of being like a gopher. With the master key the security guards held, we had the ability to pop up into any building at any time with ease. We drove around at least 3 hours while he just showed me the exterior of the grounds, the access roads, and went over which keys opened which doors. Much to my horror, one of the buildings I was responsible for was the old doctor's house. It had been turned into a museum, showing the progress of mental health at the facility since the 1800s. It was filled with mannequins, showing the different procedures, along with a bunch of antiques, which most likely belonged to the doctor. This included an old phonograph, vials, medical tools, and some old pictures. The house was huge and Victorian in style. It was pretty cool during the day, but at night, the mannequins made it feel like the set from House of Wax. If you're not familiar with that movie, you should look it up. He then explained that I would be responsible for checking every building, 3 times per my 8-hour shift, as well as escorting the police with the new patients to their respective buildings. It would also be my responsibility to patrol the grounds, making sure no one was trespassing, and to question anyone suspicious. Seeing as there really wasn't any fencing, and once you were outside the buildings where the patients were, there really wasn't any security whatsoever. So basically, if a patient were able to make it out of 3 locked doors, or even found a way to sneak outside, there was nothing stopping them from calling a cab and just leaving. Learning this, I assumed there would be other security guards on duty. Surely no one person could cover the entire grounds, let alone apprehend a potential escapee. Yet, to add to my growing list of surprises, I would in fact be alone for my whole shift. Matt tried to assure me that it seemed like a lot, but the job itself had a tendency to be pretty boring. There were a lot of tasks, but it took seconds to do each one. and I would soon find myself wandering the area simply for lack of anything better to do. I was skeptical, and after a couple of days on my own, I was still skeptical. All the buildings were so old, and each had a horrible feeling to them. The tunnels made my skin crawl, especially at night. Many times in the middle of the night, there wouldn't be any way to know if you were alone or not. Sometimes you could hear the echo of footsteps getting closer and closer, only to get to a corner and see no one. And the noises would stop. You would be completely alone, with just the memory of what you thought you heard. Despite my fears and paranoia that there was something off about the entire place, the job itself was kind of boring. At night, it was kind of fun. I could access anything with my master key, so I often would let myself into the gym or into the game room to kill some time. Other times, I would just explore. There was so much to check out and see. I figured it would take me years to learn what was behind every door. One night, when I was feeling particularly adventurous, I decided to snoop around some of the random doors that were in the tunnels. I figured they were probably just closets or old storage areas. But in previous adventures, I'd found an old room with a ton of old pictures and paintings from long since deceased patients. Maybe I'll get lucky again, I thought. The building the security office was in was connected to an easy access point to get to the tunnels, so I decided to go about half a mile away from that area. It was late, and while I wasn't sure of the rules, I just really didn't want to get caught going in places I didn't have any business being in. I turned down my radio, just in case someone was walking nearby. I didn't want the ambient chatter from the control room and orderlies to give away my position while exploring. While I was walking around, something odd caught my eye. There was a door that was painted to blend in with the wall. I thought, how have I never noticed this before? All the others were red or green and stood out. Deciding that a door intentionally painted to be hidden would be the perfect place to start my night of snooping, I whipped out my master key. As I looked down to inspect the door handle, I noticed even that was painted to blend in. There was also something stuck in the keyhole. I knelt down to take a closer look. It looked like someone had shoved part of a nail file in it, and the tip broke off. Seemed odd, but maybe I wasn't the only one who was curious about this door, except whoever had tried last didn't have access to a master key. While I was contemplating this, I heard a faint voice, "Leave it alone," followed by a loud bang from the other side of the door. I flung myself back from the door, pushing myself up on the opposite wall. My heart was in my throat, and I thought I was going to throw up. Panicked, I turned up my radio. I tried calming myself down, thinking the voice I heard was just the control center doing a radio check. So I radioed in. "This is Officer N to Control. Were you trying to reach me?" After what felt like a small eternity, my radio crackled to life. "Control to Officer N. No, is everything all right?" "Yes, Control. Just heard some static. Double checking. In, over, and out." I replied as calmly as I could. Chalking it up to sleep deprivation and too much caffeine, I decided the only course of action was to go back upstairs, get some fresh air, walk above ground back to the security office. That would not be the last time I heard something out of place. We often had alarms go off at night that were triggered by motion, only for there to be nothing once I got there. Most notably, another overnight shift, I got a call that the alarm was going off in the doctor's house, the museum. I hated going there at night. The house was built before electricity, so where some of the switches were didn't make a lot of sense. You had to navigate across the entirety of the downstairs area to get to the first light switch. As you did, there were mannequins that seemed to follow your every move, They were situated at the top of the staircase, and the streetlights outside the window illuminated them in a truly ethereal way. Also, being a 5'2" female, I always wondered what they expected me to do if there was an actual intruder. I am a combat veteran, and I have self-defense training. Unfortunately, experience in that as well. But going into a dark house alone without any hope of backup for at least half an hour just seemed needlessly reckless. At any rate, I made my way into the house. As I approached the side door we entered from, I noticed the door was wide open. This was not good. I had done the check at the beginning of my shift only 2 hours ago, and I know I locked it behind me. Seeing it open now filled me with dread, so I radioed the control center. Into control. Alarm is still active and the front door is wide open. Has maintenance been in here for any reason? While I waited for a response, I decided to go back to the security van and turn the lights on. They were basically just traffic hazard lights, but if anyone was in there, it might scare them. Just then, the radio broke me out of my fixation on the door. Control to in. No one has been in the building since the last time you were there. I sighed and reflected deeply on how I needed a new job. Usually in these situations, it goes without saying, if I didn't report back within 20 minutes, Control would just call the police. At the very least, someone will find my body, I reassured myself darkly as I entered the house. The first thing that struck me was the smell, because it smelled, well, fresh. I don't know how else to describe it. I mean, it's an old house filled with old things and an old smell. But now I was hit with a smell like the whole house had recently been aired out. I know the door had been open, but as I moved through the house, there's no way just the door being open could air out over a century of stale old air. As I walked through, I was turning on lights, and I was about to make my way upstairs when I heard slamming in the basement. Up to this point, I'd never been down there. The door to it was usually locked. Cautiously, I headed downstairs, straining my ears to listen for any noise, when suddenly, my radio blared to life, causing me to let out a startled yelp. Control to in. Are you in the attic? Into control, no, I'm headed into the basement now. In. Maintenance is headed your way. They reported seeing a light on in the attic. Leave the house until they get there. My heart started to race. I heard slamming in the basement. How was there someone in the attic? You needed to go up a third staircase and climb a ladder to get up there. It's really easy to miss as the access is through a closet, and that door was locked as well. Just then, another loud bang came from the basement. Just like in the tunnels, I heard a faint voice from behind me. Please don't go. My adrenaline peaked. I made, in hindsight, a horrible judgment call and raced for the basement door. I used my master key to open it and shone my flashlight inside in a broad sweep. What I saw still gives me nightmares. Before me were several jail cells. It almost looked like the old West-style cells you would see in a movie. Inside them were old-fashioned school desks, and seated in each desk was a child-sized mannequin. I stifled a scream while my brain slowly took in what I was seeing and began to rationalize it. Then all at once, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and two of the mannequins fell over. This time I did not hold back my scream. I turned and swung my flashlight like the bases were loaded and I was about to win the World Series. To my continued horror, I heard a loud groan as my flashlight connected with a very large man behind me. The maintenance man, to be specific. Fortunately, he was significantly taller than me, so I only really hit him in the stomach, and it didn't seem like I did any serious damage, aside from winding him. He apologized for scaring me, and I apologized for hitting him. After he caught his breath and I had calmed down a bit, we decided to check out the attic together. We discussed the basement scenario and how odd it was. I guess he had never seen it before either. After checking out the entire building, we could find nothing amiss. No reason for the attic light to be on, especially considering how that closet door was still locked. We also couldn't figure out how the front door was unlocked and open. The only thing we could think of was maybe a child from back when this place was run as a self-sustained village wanted a friend, or was up to some mischief to try and get a scare out of us. Well, I hope they know they succeeded. The Creepy School, from Marshall 787. You can call me Marty. I've been working as a second shift custodian at an old elementary school in Connecticut for a little over 2 years now. My shift starts just before the kids let out for the day. The school was torn down in the 90s and was originally built all the way back in the 1890s. Whenever it's just me after the after-school program is over, I'm the only person on my floor. Every moment, it feels like I'm being watched. There was a point in time when we were short-staffed. By the time it got to around 8 p.m., I would be the only person in the school, and I still would have 2 hours left before I could leave. One night, I got done with my usual chores around 9 p.m. I was putting my things away in my custodial closet. From the complete other side of the hall, I heard a loud noise, a sort of bang. 5 seconds afterward, it happened again, bang. I was terrified, and no one else was in the building. I thought at first someone must have broke in. I heard the loud bang a third time, and it sounded like someone was slamming boxes filled with pots and pans against the floor as it echoed through the hallway. But I still didn't see anything. I was so terrified. Thinking someone had broken in, I leapt up the main stairwell, locked the door to the office, and went into the principal's office to check the cameras. I scoured them, but there was nothing. I could see perfectly into that corner where I'd heard the sounds coming from. I gave it a few minutes before finally figuring I would go and check it out. I walked quietly down the first floor hall as I went to the far set of stairs that would bring me to the end of that hallway where I heard the crashing sounds. I very nervously went down the stairs and poked my head out. Again, nothing. I looked around frantically. Nothing broken, nothing on the floor, nothing anywhere. My mind figured it must be some sort of ghost. I felt even more creeped out than I already was. I was done cleaning for the night, so I ran upstairs, closed the door to the office once more, and tried to calm myself. I waited for 9:55 p.m. to come around, when I could finally punch out and head home. At long last, I punched out and ran out of the school like a madman. The following day, I asked the head custodian if there was anything wrong when he got there. He said no. It took me a while before I could really tell anyone this story. It made me so uncomfortable that at times I would almost start crying. I saw nothing, and yet heard these awful, loud, startling noises. Since then, about a year back, I occasionally feel that if I take a quick look, I'll see something out of the corner of my eye. And half the time, a room I go into becomes so cold, I get cold sweats down my body. I don't know what it was to this very day. I've had nothing like that happen since, and I hope it doesn't happen again. Working late. From Rio. I'm in my early 30s, and like many in my field, I spend most of my time behind a computer screen, sifting through numbers and data sets. looking for trends and patterns that can give our clients a competitive edge. It's not glamorous work, but it is what I'm good at. I've been working as a data analyst for the past 5 years. It's a decent job, stable and well-paying, but the workload can be crushing, especially since the company downsized last year. Many of my colleagues were let go, and those of us who remained had to pick up the slack. Overtime became the norm, and late nights at the office were almost expected. The office is located in an old building downtown, a relic from the 1920s that's been renovated multiple times, but still holds a lot of its original charm and quirks. The place has always had a strange vibe, especially after dark. Colleagues would sometimes share stories about odd occurrences, computers turning on by themselves, doors closing without a breeze, whispers in empty hallways. I never paid much attention to those stories. I'm a man of logic and reason, not superstition. But the workload meant I was often the last one in the office, burning the midnight oil. The silence of that empty building, combined with the dim, flickering fluorescent lights, created an atmosphere that was, at times, unsettling. And yet, I had deadlines to meet, clients to impress, so I brushed off the uneasy feeling that crept in every now and then. I settled into my cubicle, the soft hum of the air conditioner my only company, really. I tried to ignore that creepy feeling that seemed to settle over me the moment the sun went down. Suddenly, the lights began to flicker. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Just a power surge," I muttered to myself, trying to sound convincing, even as my hands shook. But the feeling of something strange only grew stronger, especially when I began to hear whispering coming from one of the empty cubicles around me. I scratched at my ears and listened. The sound faded. Maybe I was hearing things. I forced myself to focus on my work. Every minute felt like an eternity. Then, just when I was feeling comfortable again, I heard it. A soft, raspy breath right behind me. I spun around in my chair. There was no one there, just an empty cubicle. It was getting harder and harder to convince myself that it was just my imagination. Something wasn't right. I wasn't alone in that office, not by a long shot. The office seemed to grow colder then, darker too. That was when the air conditioner just shut off, leaving me there in the office in unsettling silence, until I began to hear my own heartbeat. I decided I was done. I began to pack my things up. I'd finish my work at home and beg my boss to forgive me for it. They don't like work being done outside the office. As I stood up, I heard it once more, that raspy breath. It was behind me again, but much closer. I turned so quickly, my eyes darting around, searching for something. But the office remained empty. I began to run towards the exit, my footsteps echoing. Just as I made it to the door, the lights flickered once more, and something cold, like a hand, brushed against my neck. I spun around with a scream, expecting to see someone. But of course, as you would expect from this kind of story, there was nothing there. The office was silent and as empty as it had been all night. My hands shook as I fumbled with the door handle. Finally, I managed to open it, and I stumbled out into the hallway. The oppressive atmosphere lifted the moment I crossed that threshold. But I didn't look back. I hurried for the elevator, jabbing the button repeatedly until the doors finally opened. As I went down the elevator, I continued to feel watched. When the doors opened to the lobby, I bolted for the exit, the chilling night air much warmer, much more welcome on my flushed skin. I never worked late again after that. No deadline was worth the terror I felt. And whenever I passed by that office building, I couldn't help but glance up at the darkened windows, wondering what lingered in the shadows of the cursed office on those eerie floors. The apparition transfers over. From Walker 11. I worked at a small, always open convenience store. The ones you find on the sides of highways for truckers and things like that. There, I mostly worked the night shift, since the pay was better, even though that place had always given me the creeps. It was located on the outskirts of town, and it was a small, dingy place that catered to, let's just say, grumpy people most of the time. The neon open 24/7 sign buzzed constantly, casting this eerie glow over the parking lot at night. I had taken the job, as I was desperate. I had debts to pay off, like most people do. My shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m. It was usually quiet, with only a handful of customers coming in during the night. Most of them were regulars, truck drivers stopping for coffee, the occasional insomniac looking for some food, and the odd teenager trying to buy beer with a fake ID. It was routine, monotonous, and frankly extremely boring. But it was something at least. One night about 3 months into the job, something happened that I would never forget. It started off like any other shift. I clocked in, greeted my coworker who was leaving, and settled into my usual routine. I checked the inventory, restocked the shelves, and made sure the coffee machine was working. Let me tell you, truckers love their late-night coffee, and you better not be caught running low. By midnight, the store was empty and I was alone. Around 1 a.m., a man walked in. A pretty tall fella. I'd say about 6'2" or somewhere around there. He had a scruffy, unkempt beard and one of those worn-out leather jackets with a biker gang logo on the back. He looked a bit off, tired and grumpy, but not like the usual trucker that passes through. Nah, he looked like he had been on the road for days. He grabbed a cup of coffee and came to the counter. His eyes were bloodshot, and there was something unsettling about the way he looked at me. "Rough night?" I asked, trying to make some small talk. He didn't answer. He just stared at me, eyes dark and hollow, almost like he was looking through me. I felt a chill run down my spine. He did eventually speak, though, voice low and gravelly. "Have you seen her?" he asked. "Seen who?" I replied, confused. "The woman," he said, eyes glued to my face. "She's been following me." I glanced around and looked behind him. There was no one else in the store. "I don't see anyone," I replied, trying to sound reassuring. "Maybe you're just tired." He shook his head, his expression growing more desperate. "No, she's real. I've seen her. She's always there watching me. She's here. I know it." I really didn't know what to reply to him. He looked genuinely terrified, and his paranoid demeanor was starting to make me uneasy. "Maybe you should get some rest," I suggested, trying to get him to leave the store quickly. "There's a motel down the road. You can get a room, sleep for a few hours." He didn't respond. He just took his coffee and walked out. But he did glance over his shoulder before he left. I watched him go, a nauseating, eerie feeling settling in my stomach. I ignored it and went back to my tasks. But you don't stop thinking about something like that, at least not for a while. I began to wonder if he was hallucinating from lack of sleep. And I knew from experience you'd have to be awake for a few days for that to happen. I was a little hesitant to let him back on the road in that state, but I sure as heck wasn't going to try and talk some sense into him. A few hours passed by. The store remained relatively quiet, with only one more customer showing up after the mystery man. I was starting to feel relaxed again when I heard the chime of the door. I looked up, expecting another customer, but no one was there. Had the door opened on its own? That creeped me out a bit, so I walked over to it, opened it and closed it to make sure everything was all right. It seemed fine. The hinges didn't seem loose, and it wasn't particularly windy outside. I reluctantly turned around to go back to my counter, but as I did, I saw her. She was standing in the aisle, a pale, ghostly face with long, wet, dark hair. She wore ripped jeans and an oversized hoodie. I stood there, shocked. Was I looking at someone in a costume or something else? In a rapid motion, she jerked her head towards me, staring at me. Her eyes were hollow, and her skin appeared to have a rough-looking texture to it. Her expression was blank and emotionless. I remained frozen, heart pounding. Can I help you?" I managed to stammer. She didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at me with those empty eyes. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I stepped back towards the door, mind still reeling. This isn't real, I told myself. It's some kind of prank. Someone is messing with me. Or maybe I was tired. Deep down, though, I knew I was encountering something horrible. I reached for my phone, and when I looked up again, the woman was gone. The aisle was empty. I walked over, my hands shaking, but there was no sign of her. I checked the entire store too, but I was alone. I spent the rest of my shift on edge, jumping at every sound, looking over my shoulder. When my coworker arrived to relieve me in the morning, I was a nervous wreck. "You okay?" she asked, noticing my pale face and trembling hands. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just a rough night." I didn't tell her about the woman. I didn't think she would believe me. Heck, I wasn't even sure if I believed it. But the image of that ghostly woman haunted me for a while. A week later, I was on the midnight shift again. A couple of hours passed since my shift started. Everything so far was normal. Then at about 1:20 a.m., the man came in again. He came in around the same time, looking even more tired than he had been before. He grabbed a cup of coffee and came to the counter. His gaze was wild and erratic, always looking around the store as he was talking. "She's still following me," he said, voice trembling. "I can't get away from her." I wanted to help him, but I didn't know how. "Maybe you should talk to someone," I suggested. "A therapist, a counselor." He shook his head quickly. "They won't believe me. No one believes me." I didn't know what to say. He looked so desperate. I felt a tinge of sympathy for him, but there was nothing I could do, and then it dawned on me. "What does this woman look like?" I asked, cautiously. He looked at me for a few moments, not blinking. Finally, he spoke. To my horror, he described her as a ghostly pale woman with wet hair and ripped jeans, a perfect match of the woman I saw the week before. I guess he saw my face contort into disbelief and shock because he asked me, "You've seen her too?" I nodded. still taken aback by the matching description. "How long have you been seeing her?" I asked, wondering if he knew more about this. He looked away, his step and demeanor becoming more agitated. "A month. At first, I saw her here and there in the corner of my eye, but then she started to appear more, staying longer before she disappeared right as I looked in her direction. But now when I stare at her, she stares back." He sounded so scared. He looked back to me with a 1,000-yard stare. Soon he broke out of his little trance, paid for the coffee, and left, glancing over his shoulder just once as he walked out the door. After he was gone, I just stood there, staring at the door he just walked out of. I didn't know what to think anymore, didn't know what to do, what to say. I wasn't sure if I was somehow inhaling some toxic fumes that were making me go crazy, or if this was actually happening. The girl I saw, his description, it must be a coincidence, right? I was influenced by his words, and the tiredness made me hallucinate some strange woman, when it was actually just some stressed-out customer. The night continued on, and I was constantly looking around, paranoid. No more customers showed up, so I was left alone with my thoughts and the buzzing of the cheap lights all around me. It was almost 4 a.m. and still no customers. To keep myself busy, I decided to restock the shelves a bit, make myself a cup of coffee to keep me awake. As I was making my coffee, I looked up from the machine towards the parking lot because I thought I had heard a car. But when I looked out, there were no cars to be found there. The parking lot was entirely empty. Well, aside from a peculiar figure standing in the distance. I looked closer, trying to see who or what it was. When I blinked, it was no longer there. So I brushed it off, cursing that creepy guy for filling my head with crazy, scary ideas before returning to the counter. That night was the last time I saw the creepy guy. A few days afterward, I was reading through the newspaper. I saw in the obituaries a familiar face. The man. The tall, overly tired man. The second I recognized him, thoughts came rushing into my head, trying to make up scenarios of what could have happened. Though based on how he'd been acting, he probably had a heart attack or crashed into a tree somewhere. Still, his words about the woman stayed with me. One night I woke up in the middle of the night, restless, so I stayed up and tried to find out as much as I could about the guy. But he had no online presence, no family as far as I could tell. All I could find was a slightly more detailed obituary for him. Cause of death was, in fact, a heart attack. He'd been found in the middle of the road in his car just outside of town. I still couldn't shake away the feeling that something was seriously wrong. But I ignored it, and I went back to bed. My next midnight shift was going fine, but it was clear my mental health was deteriorating there, and fast. I worked there for about 2 more weeks before finally quitting. I just couldn't handle the night shifts anymore. The memory of that woman and the guy constantly came back into my head, even when I was trying to focus on anything else. It took a while, but I found a new job. Currently, I'm working as a janitor at the local elementary school. Been working there for about a month now, and it's going great. The pay is absolutely atrocious, but better than nothing, right? However, lately something strange has been going on. Almost every day, be it at work or at home, I keep imagining I'm seeing something right outside of my peripheral vision. Then when I turn to look in that direction, there's nothing there. I can't move on from that experience. The creepy guy's words echoing in my head every single day. How he said he first saw her here and there in the corner of his eye, but then she started to appear more, staying longer, before she would disappear right as he looked in her direction. Then he said, "But now when I stare at her, she stares back." I'm not going to end up like him, am I? Night Shift Nightmare. From Gaming Waffles. Let me start off by saying, while I know not all people are like this, when I tell you real people are more dangerous than anything paranormal or supernatural, I mean it. While the spookies have their place, I am far more afraid of what a person can do, rather than some ghost, demon, etc. You get my point. The story I'm going to share with you is 100% true. This happened back when I was a teenager, but it still scares me to this day. I'm a 24-year-old woman now. This story is the reason I refuse to work or go out at night anymore. For context, I used to work at a fast food joint during closing shifts. I'm not entirely sure if I'm allowed to mention the restaurant's name, so for privacy reason, to avoid getting into trouble, I'll refer to the restaurant as The Joint. Now on to the story. The last car finally pulled away, marking the end of another long day. It was closing time. I never quite understood why people rushed to a fast food joint just before closing. You've had all day, you know, and who suddenly craves a burger at 10 o'clock at night? I was busy sweeping the front lobby, stacking chairs on tables, rolling up the rugs. My coworkers were equally engrossed, tidying up the ice cream section, cleaning the kitchen and such. Meanwhile, my manager was in the back, counting the day's earnings and securing the money in the safe. As I finished rolling up the last rug, a flicker of movement outside the front windows caught my eye. I glanced up, squinting through the glass. There in the otherwise empty parking lot stood a man under the lone light pole. The soft yellowish glow illuminated him, casting long shadows across the asphalt. He stood still, almost unnaturally so, making the hair on the back of my neck prickle. A knot formed in my gut. We'd been closed for over an hour now, and the two businesses on either side of us were also shut down for the night. This person had no reason to be out there. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe he was a parent waiting to pick up their teenager, perhaps someone's boyfriend. After all, everyone on staff that night, except for the manager, was under 18. Yet, something about the way he stood so still under that lone light made it hard to shake the uneasy feeling creeping over me. I tried to push my fear to the side. This wasn't my first rodeo dealing with weirdos. For some reason, our restaurant seemed to be a magnet for creeps, weirdos, and crackheads. I'd lost count of the times I'd had to serve belligerent, drunk men or deal with violent adults furious over a wrong order. I even once watched a grown woman jump over the counter to fight one of my coworkers, who, by the way, was a minor, because she claimed they gave her attitude. But this guy standing in the parking lot was different. There was something unnerving about the way he was so still, the way he remained under that single light. I shook my head, forcing myself to focus on finishing up my tasks. I didn't want to let my mind wander anymore. Fast forward to well past midnight now. One of my female coworkers, B, suddenly came sprinting back into the building, doubled over and panting. We all gathered round, concerned and curious about what could have caused her to rush back in like that. Our manager quickly ushered her into the office, helping her to sit down and offering a cup of water to catch her breath. After a moment to compose herself, B began to explain what had happened. She'd been out by our dumpsters, a dark corner shielded by a cinder block fencing with only sparse illumination from the distant parking lot light. A man emerged from the darkness and approached her, asking if we were still open. B, startled, politely informed the man that we were closed, and she turned to leave. But before she could get away, the man grabbed her arm forcefully, spinning her back around to face him. He was a towering figure, easily over 6 feet tall, with long, dark, greasy hair and an unkempt, scruffy beard. His eyes were unsettling. Bea recalled that his pupils were so dilated she couldn't see the whites of his eyes. He wore a wide grin, a grin that did not reach his eyes, sending chills down her spine. Everyone was visibly shaken by Bea's harrowing encounter, and I could feel a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. Was this the same man I'd seen earlier that night? Guilt gnawed at me for not saying something sooner. Maybe if I had, Bea would not have been grabbed. Perhaps we could have been more prepared. Our manager, now thoroughly spooked herself, sternly declared that no one was to go outside alone. We hurriedly finished our tasks and left together as a group, seeking safety in numbers. As we walked out into the parking lot, Bea suddenly spotted the man standing under the light pole once more. She pointed him out to the manager, who, despite her petite stature, marched straight towards him like a determined mama bear. She shouted things at the man I dare not repeat. I feared the worst, expecting the situation to escalate into something horrible before our eyes. But to everyone's disbelief and relief, the man turned and bolted. He sprinted across the parking lot and disappeared into the neighboring car wash lot. This is where my story ends. My manager called the cops, but by the time they got there, the creep was long gone. We never saw him again either, and thankfully we never had another encounter like that. Let this be a lesson, a warning if you will. I said it once in the beginning and I'll say it again. Real people are more dangerous than anything paranormal or supernatural. Tales from the Break Room is a viewer-submitted podcast featuring allegedly true scary stories that happened on the way to, on the way from, or at work. If you want your story to be narrated on the show, send it to us at eeriecast.com/submit. As of April 14th, we're paying 3 cents per word for stories that are approved and make it onto the show. Submission does not guarantee approval or payment. For a limited time only, PayPal only. Tales from the Break Room is an EerieCast Network original podcast hosted by Darkness Prevails. You can follow him on Twitter at Dark Prevails, and you can hear thousands more stories read by him on our other show, Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also enjoy plenty more horror-themed podcasts at eeriecast.com.